Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we are jumping right into it today. We're looking at the dramatic and ultimately pretty tragic story of Britain's second Labour government, which held power from 1929 to 1931. This is a fascinating narrative arc. It's a story of groundbreaking optimism, some towering historical firsts, and incredibly ambitious diplomacy, all of which violently collides with literally the greatest economic catastrophe of the 20th century. So we're going to unpack exactly how Ramsay MacDonald's administration rose to power, what they actually managed to achieve, and how it all came crashing down so quickly.
Here's our roadmap. 1. Formation and the cabinet. 2. Domestic reforms. 3. Global diplomacy and disarmament. 4. The empire and India. And finally, 5. The Wall Street crash. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Formation and the cabinet. So, following the general election in June of 1929, Labour actually emerged as the largest single party. But there was a massive catch. They critically lacked an overall majority in Parliament. This meant they were entirely reliant on Liberal Party support just to stay in power and pass laws.
Now, the makeup of this cabinet was genuinely historic. You've got Ramsay MacDonald returning as Prime Minister, and his main goal was to prove to the country that Labour was a credible, highly respectable party of government. Philip Snowden backed him up with that same cautious tone as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Then you have Arthur Henderson, who practically demanded the role of Foreign Secretary. But crucially, you also have Margaret Bonfield taking the role of Minister of Labour. This is a massive milestone, Britain's first ever woman cabinet minister.
And when they first got the Keens to number 10, the mood was incredibly optimistic. Unemployment had actually dipped slightly, giving them a bit of breathing room. The administration laid out some hugely ambitious goals. We're talking about building council houses, taking public control of London's transport system, raising the school leaving age to 15, and really tackling unemployment head-on through government work schemes.
Section 2. Domestic reforms and legislation. Let's look at what they actually put into practice.
Despite the headache of being a minority government, they pushed through some monumental reforms. Take Arthur Greenwood's Housing Act in 1930. He brought back crucial subsidies and strongly empowered local authorities to clear out slums. And to put that into perspective, because of this specific act, more slums were cleared between 1934 and 1939 than in the entire previous half-century combined. They also passed the Agricultural Marketing Act to help fix food prices, and Herbert Morrison introduced the London Transport Bill to create a public corporation for cheap transit.
Another really landmark piece of legislation was the Coal Mines Act of 1930. You have to remember the lingering, deep-seated bitterness in the mining industry left over from the general strike of 1926. This act was an attempt to heal some of those wounds. It reduced miner shifts from 8 hours down to 7.5. It gave employers the ability to fix minimum wages and production quotas, and it even set up a commission to figure out how to phase out unprofitable mines without just entirely destroying the miners' livelihoods.
But it definitely wasn't all smooth sailing. Their record was a real mix of successes and failures, and that was driven directly by their minority status. Sure, they successfully increased unemployment benefits, which was a huge win, but they completely failed to repeal the vindictive 1927 Trade Disputes Act because the Liberals just flat-out refused to support it. They also failed to pass Charles Trevelyan's Education Bill, and interestingly, before the House of Lords could even reject it, it got shot down by fierce resistance from Catholic Labour MPs who felt the bill didn't provide enough support for faith schools.
Section 3. Global diplomacy and disarmament. The international stage.
Over on the international front, there was this catchy phrase flying around the party's left wing, "Left could speak unto left." There was a genuine idealistic hope that a socialist Britain could naturally understand and ally with socialist Russia. But Ramsay MacDonald? Very pragmatic. He firmly refused to risk British national interests by aligning with Soviet ideas of global revolution. For him, prioritizing a responsible, reliable parliamentary image was way more important than fringe radicalism.
Now, to really grasp why navigating this relationship was so delicate, we have to remember the Zinoviev letter from 1924. This was a highly controversial document that had caused a massive nosedive in Anglo-Soviet relations during the first Labour government. Getting past that old baggage was a top priority, and in October 1929, they finally managed to successfully resume formal diplomatic relations and exchange ambassadors with the USSR.
But the absolute star of the show internationally was Arthur Henderson. After just 2 months on the job, he negotiated the Young Plan at The Hague. This was a huge diplomatic victory. It greatly reduced Germany's post-war reparations, advanced him a $300 million loan, and essentially reintegrated Germany as an equal nation in Europe.
Henderson was deeply trusted at the League of Nations in Geneva, and he managed to bring French and German representatives closer together than they had been since the end of the First World War.
While Henderson was working Europe, Prime Minister MacDonald headed across the Atlantic to tackle the incredibly thorny issue of disarmament. In October 1929, he visited the United States to talk about the relative strength of national navies, which had been a major sticking point stalling global peace talks. His efforts there led to something called the ratio principle, which was a groundbreaking compromise to establish strict proportions for building warships among the world's maritime superpowers.
So, what did that actually look like? At an early 1930 tri-nation conference, the USA, Britain, and Japan agreed to a naval warship building ratio of 5 to 5 to 3. Now yes, Japan would later abandon this as they prepared for war, but these close, collaborative contacts with Britain and the US laid absolutely crucial groundwork that would matter immensely when the Second World War eventually broke out.
Section 4. The Empire and India, an ideological paradox. So, the Labour Party had openly stated their aim of Indian independence since its earliest days. During this administration, they started taking tentative steps toward dominion status, basically a level of semi-autonomous self-government within the empire. But the Indian Congress Party, they were done waiting for these slow, methodical talks. In December 1929, they just went ahead and made a unilateral declaration of Indian independence.
Knowing full well that Britain wouldn't recognize this declaration, Mohandas Gandhi organized a massive, highly symbolic protest. In 1930, he led thousands of people on a 250-mile march to the coastal town of Dandi. Once there, he picked up a lump of sea salt and crushed it. He was protesting a law that legally forced Indians to buy heavily taxed, government-owned salt. And for this incredibly simple act of defiance, Gandhi was arrested and thrown in prison. You can see the massive political headache this caused for MacDonald's government. Think about it. You have a Labour government, ideologically dedicated to the concept of Indian independence, awkwardly forced into playing the role of the heavy-handed imperial authority, suppressing that exact movement. Desperate for a solution, MacDonald engaged in some really complex political maneuvering, eventually releasing Gandhi from prison and inviting him to a roundtable conference in London in November 1930.
Section 5. The Wall Street Crash. The final chapter.
In September 1929, the entire game changed. The Wall Street crash triggered the Great Depression, and it absolutely strained the British economy to its breaking point. Unemployment skyrocketed, putting immense, crushing pressure on the unemployment insurance system, the dole. Now, Chancellor Philip Snowden was strictly committed to economic orthodoxy. He stubbornly wanted to maintain the gold standard and rigidly balance the budget, which collided violently with the soaring costs of the crisis. There were alternative proposals, like Oswald Mosley's famous memorandum calling for direct, aggressive state intervention, but those were firmly rejected. The global situation rapidly unraveled, completely wiping out Henderson's hard-won disarmament advances.
The political fallout of this economic disaster was absolute. The economic strain completely fractured the Labour Party from the inside out. By the time the 1931 election rolled around, the party was practically smashed to bits. They retained less than 20%, literally a fifth of the parliamentary seats they had so proudly won just 2 years prior in 1929.
And just to put into perspective how insanely fast this all unraveled, jumping back to the India timeline for a second, by the time Gandhi finally arrived in London for those hard-fought roundtable talks, the second Labour government had already collapsed under the sheer weight of the global depression and formally resigned from office.
So it leaves us with this incredible historical puzzle. How does a government move from the groundbreaking optimism of electing the first female cabinet minister, clearing half a century's worth of slums, and forging major global disarmament treaties to utter electoral ruin in just 24 months? It is a fascinating, stark reminder of how rapidly global economic forces can completely rewrite domestic history. Thanks for joining us for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep exploring the past.